All right, good morning and welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're still watching Daybreak on Trust TV. And it's now time for us to review headlines on major newspapers in the country. Now we'll start, of course, with Daily Trust newspaper. And the lead story here says Nigeria must have national dream identity, says Obasanjo. We have writers on the front page that says country needs unifier to address current disunity. Nigeria's future will be great, says Oshibajo. Leadership quality declining, recruitment process faulty, says Agbakoba and Jega. Don't get carried away by propaganda, says Okonjo Iweala. And you can find details of this story on page 4. We also have more stories. Despite high external reserve, forex pressure remains as MPC meets today. We also have August revenue drops by 280 billion naira as federal government, states, local governments areas share 673.137 billion naira. Details of that on page 19. Army produces pamphlets to guide officers on elections. And just beside these stories, we have a pictorial here of some youths pushing a car trapped in a flooded road along Tunde Idiagon Way in Jabi, Abuja yesterday. And these are some of the stories on Daily Trust newspaper.
Up next is the Guardian newspaper, which has a major headline saying more airlines depart empty as charges rejections stifle export. The story has riders. One of them said air freight import to export ratio slumps to 87 to 13. Stakeholders condemn overseas ban of local yam, beans, smoked fish, ginger, others. Regulators squeak under staff shortage, multiple guidelines, poor compliance with standards. Lastly, single head guideline, better cooperation imperative, says FAN and NEPSA. And on the top of the page, PFN disowns Northern Bishops meeting with Tinubu as more disquiet trail APC campaign council. Details on this story on page 8. And then Harvard University to honor Chimamanda with WB Du Bois Medal. This is a story that has details on page 2. And if you come down the page, $23 million Abacha loot, Serap sues Buhari Malami over failure to publish pact with US. The details of that story is on page 3. And then Huria flees Songolu over suffocating taxation. Story on page 5. And Obasanjo, Okonjo Iweala, others decry absence of purposeful leadership in Nigeria. Lastly, police retirees denounce SGF urge National Assembly to pass pension bill. Details of that story is on page 7. These are the stories on the front page of today's Guardian newspaper.
All right, up next is the Nation newspaper, and right at the top of the page, you have anti-oil theft. IG confirms seizure of 123 vessels. Can president's youths don't be politicians' body shields? We also have why we have not endorsed Peter Obi by Ohaneze. Details on page 5. And we also have Oyetola Adeleke trade words as tribunal begins sitting. We also have just below the nameplates there, petrol subsidy hits 2.57 trillion naira as supply rises by 10%. 7 doctors undergoing trial over misconduct and 7 burned to death in Lagos crash. And the lead story here talks about disquiet in PDP NWC over 10 billion naira nomination fees. Riders here say members complain about depletion of cash to 1 billion naira. Controversy over bribery lingers. Okowa seeks Saraki's intervention over Wike's threat to boycott presidential campaigns. And we have more stories on the Nation newspaper. Anxieties as CBN set to raise interest rates to new high. And just on the footnote there, court fixes Wednesday for judgment in Machina versus Lowen case. These are some of the stories on the Nation newspaper.
The next paper we are looking at is The Punch. And from the top of the page, it says 37 farms get licensed to produce 762.3 megawatts. Police sees 123 oil vessels. Others begin prosecution. There is the detail of that story is on page 8. Next to it, Nigeria's economic outlook uncertain, welfare worsening, says World Bank. And Muslim ticket, Tinubu Shetima frustrating reconciliation, says Lawal story on page 41. And just by the masthead, 7 Lagos passengers burnt in crash, firefighters attacked, story on page 4. And then Lagos Ibadan traffic, police kidnappers exchange gunfire, traveler rescued. And then the major headline this morning, there's politics and insecurity, demand for bulletproof vehicles, special security gadgets surges, VIPs, politicians, others procure armored SUVs, demand overwhelms dealers. Suppliers confirm increased demand. Sales expert worry over killings, kidnapping. Politicians' actions show 2023 polls may not be violence free, says pro-democracy groups. And then just below that, Nigeria at 62, end ASU strike now, Khan tells FG. And on top of that, we have pictorials showing Vice President Professor Yemi Oshibanjo, his wife Dolapo, Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, and his wife also attending the anniversary, the Independence Anniversary special prayer session at the National Christian Center in Abuja, as well as 2 other pictures from Lagos and Port Harcourt showing Nigerians participating in special prayers ahead of the October 1st Independence Day. So these are details from today's The Punch newspaper.
All right, let's move on to Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And we have the lead story that says 2023 polls, states to watch as campaigns kick off this week. And we also have another story. I have no political deal with Adebutu. Ogun PDP, says Amosun. PDP, APC bicker as Osun Tribunal begins sitting. Afenifere Lords Akeredolu overstands on true federalism. We also have flood sacks Kogi. FEMA asks for residents of Abuja flood-prone areas to relocate. And we also have at 62nd Independence Anniversary, just below the paper there, the page. At 62nd Independence Anniversary service, Khan says the wicked shall not rule Nigeria. And 7 burned to death in Lagos bus accident at the top of the page there. NDLEA arrests 75-year-old man, 21 others over drugs seized in 7 states, intercepts 1,001,387 bottles of opioids and Akuskura. And we also have PENCOM approves 25% withdrawal from RSA balance as equity contribution for mortgages. And these are some of the stories on Nigerian Tribune.
Okay, up next is the Blueprint newspaper. And the major story on Blueprint this morning says, ahead Wednesday's campaign kickoff, intrigues, anxiety, trail Tinubu, Atiku, and Obi's chances. Don't link Wiki to PDP's zoning crisis, Southeast Group tells Atiku. Will deliver Delta for Ashwaju, BSO. Obi's LP has no candidate in 25 senatorial districts, 100 federal constituencies. Vote for Tinubu, Atiku remain world poverty capital, Kachuku tells Nigerians. Cast your votes for good governance, Makinde task electorate. And on top of the page, flood, 7 die, 1,300 households destroyed, 2,800 displaced in Kwara. Hyperdeck delivers 50 million relief materials, thousands homeless in Kogi and Niger. Down the page, NNPC opens talk with financiers on gas projects. story on page 24, and on page 14 there's a story talking about at 62, Osibanjo gives hope, says Nigeria's future will be great. And below the pictorial, Katsina terrorists demand 250 million for 43 kidnapped victims, residents panic-stricken. And Abacha loot Serap sues Buhari Malami over failure to publish agreement. 2023 court fixes September 28 for judgment in Lawan Martina case. And next to that, CBN goes tough on Anchor Borrower Program loan defaulters. On page 30, ex-commissioner survived assassination attempt in Nasarawa. Lastly, on the front page of Blueprint this morning, NAS summons Minister Customs CG over dysfunctional scanners.
All right, and with that, we've come to the end of reeling out the headlines or stories on front page of some of the national dailies. And in the studio to give us an analysis on some of these stories, we have Mukhtar Suleiman, a public affairs commentator, joining us this morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us once again.
Good morning, Mukhtar. Good to see you again.
Good to see you guys too. So I always look forward to Mondays.
You actually
that's
should.
good. You are part of us as well.
What other way to start the week?
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
All right, so let's begin with the lead story on Daily Trust newspaper. I don't know if you agree with what, some Nigerian elites actually had to say about, how Nigeria needs to move forward. Obasanjo saying Nigeria must have national dream and identity. We have Vice President Oshibajo saying a Nigerian future will be great. And Agbako Banjega saying leadership quality is declining and recruitment process is faulty. And we have Okonjo Iweala saying don't get carried away by propaganda.
I like how that's the last thing. Don't get carried away by propaganda. But just to start, I think that of Obasanjo is something I've actually always said, that however diverse we think we are as a country, it is very pertinent that we begin to look for that commonalities among all of us. And for now, it is safety, it is success, it is the ability to sleep with your both eyes closed. However diverse we think we are as a country, I think in Nigeria, last time I checked, we're about 521 different tribes, specifically, but we're still not as diverse as country like the United States or India, for example. So, but however it is that we are, or those places are, they've managed to keep a common culture that allows them to proceed and progress as one country. And I think that's something that we need to look for. We need to look inwards a lot into ourselves as Nigerians, because like the cliche word usually say, the things that separate us are infinitesimal to the things that should bound us as a country.
Okay, now he actually went on to say that the country needs a unifier, and you actually talked about that. Now looking at some of the presidential aspirants of parties coming out to campaign, do you think that there's at least even one unifier amongst them?
Without any ounce of sentiment or bias, so far I think the only person that has done that right now is Peter Obi, with the way his campaign is going. Across his campaign lines, you see different people from different cultures, different people from different religions. There is an ideological build to his campaign as opposed to ethnicity, or as opposed to the trivial things that we've always planted around politics in the country.
People say his the mainstay of his politics is the Southeast, and his supporters largely like online, Twitter, and almost everywhere. You could see that majority of the people that are in the forefront are Igbo, and some actually caution him against the danger of ethnicizing his own campaign. So isn't it surprising that you are now...
I don't think he is ethnic, well, based on my own observation.
Or even going from church to church campaigning?
Well, it's the regular political game. I think he's just playing the game the way everybody else has played it before. I don't personally think he is ethnicized. Now, before I even continue saying this, I like saying this beforehand, I'm not campaigning for anybody.
Definitely.
I have no candidates that I've spoken about Atiku here before, I've spoken about Tinubu here before. But for Peter Obi so far, there are people cut across. The only problem I have with is campaigners. The one thing they have across board is the violence with which they approach certain issue. It is they're ad hominem toward someone else. They feel so if you come up and you say, oh, you are not very satisfied with something about Peter Obi, instead of them to attack the context of your argument, they attack you as a person, which is a very wrong way to actually campaign, I think. And he has actually tried, he tweets out, oh, people should keep the peace and whatnot, but it seems like violence is the order of the day, since that is this thing. But I think he needs to do more in that angle. But so far, there's been a lot of people cut across. Whether the number is significant, that is left for a debate. That's open for questioning. But I think across line, you could actually see some level of diversity in his campaign.
Okay.
People.
Two economic related stories on the front page of Daily Trust. One talking about forex, that there is an increase in our foreign reserve, but then still there's a lot of pressure on the demand, forex demand locally. Also, elsewhere, some people have reported that because, the MPC is meeting today, that is the Monetary Policy Committee of the CBN, and elsewhere, it is reported that they may increase interest rate. How do you see all these things? And then, of course, the second story on the business in the front page of Daily Trust is talking about the FAC allocation, which dips by 280 billion naira this month. So the state had to share 673 billion, maybe less than what was shared the last time.
The Nigerian financial space is one of the most complex spaces that I've actually ever noticed. It's why sometimes you look at our finance ministers, they live here, if they do well, of course, and no corruption charges against them, they go on to either the World Trade Organization or they go on to World Bank, because it's weird how you manage a system that is this with so much variables, and the country is still existing, the country still keeps moving and all of that. I'm not really that much of a finance expert, and I've not really followed most of those stories. But I know that personally, I think that the dynamism of the Nigerian financial space requires a skill that we currently don't have, because it is painful, and this is taking a toll on different parts of the economy. It seems like, from the projection of the federal government, it seems like our economic plan is to borrow and keep borrowing, and that is actually taking its toll and its hit on the forex market and a host of other things. And I think another thing that is taking a hit on this forex market now is a lot of Nigerians. Remote work. COVID came with remote work, and a lot of Nigerians are now working remotely for organizations that are not even in Africa, and they are being paid in dollars. And these people need to cash out their money so they can live their life in Nigeria. So that's also affecting the demand and supply of forex for foreign currency, especially in the country, actually.
Okay, now let's move on to the Guardian newspaper and look at the lead story that talks about more airlines depart empty as charges and rejections stifle exports. And we also have that there's a ban of some of our local foods here overseas, like yam, beans, smoked fish, ginger, and others. And we have regulators quick understaff shortage as well, multiple guidelines, poor compliance and standards, all this contributing to exports from Nigeria being totally almost zero.
The ability for the government to compromise standards for profit making sometimes, I'm saying government here as a blanket statement, because some of these people who do quality control from where the goods are actually taken to how they fly are usually government officials. The ability for them to compromise standards over profit making is usually appalling, a whole lot. And we've seen that a lot in not just even the travel, and not just even the logistics sector. Okay. You see that in a multiple array of other places. And I think that we need a strong, firm institution that ensures quality control for most of these things that is uncompromising. And if we don't do that, we're going to keep having problems like this. Because I saw that story earlier this morning, and one, I'm not surprised because of the hike in aviation fuel and how that has taken its toll on the exports community, because it's the hike in aviation fuel does not translate to increase revenue for people who are living in the country. For example, my salary has been the same for the past how many years, and I still have to fly to Kano by paying over 70K, and my office does not even care about that because my office is also not making as much money to also increase my own salary as well. So it doesn't really, it didn't really translate to a lot of income, and because of that, people are even wary about how to move ahead. Another thing is, when the international community see how we smoke our fishes, how we preserve our goods, of course they are going to be scared to want to take most of those things from us, because we do open smoking these days. People don't put in place proper machineries or proper equipment to ensure that they can protect the standards of the food, the quality of the food as well, before it's even taken for export. And then don't talk about the poor quality control, which I've actually mentioned, that ensures safety of food while you move out. And I think I've said this here before on the show, where if you travel out, you take the same brand or product that you take here, you'll notice that there's a difference in the taste, there's a difference in the texture of that thing. You go to KFC, for instance, in Nairobi, the way it tastes is completely different from the way it tastes here in Nigeria. You take Coke in the US, the way it tastes there is completely different from the way it tastes here in Nigeria. So we need to actually put a lot of, the government needs to prioritize the individual health of people and ensure that the same way other countries are ensuring that there's quality coming from us in terms of our food to go out, we have to also do the same reciprocity.
But will Nigeria ever get to a point where, you know, the import-export ratio, like the export, you know, supersedes, not even balance, supersedes the import? Because right now, import to export is at 87 to 13, and that's quite...
For as far as we remain a consuming country, it will be very difficult for us to actually measure that up. I would remember while I was in school, in the university, we always argue this thing, oh, I don't know the use of the Y, the X, and calculus, and matrices, and whatnot. So I remember that there was a time that we were doing a project in Zamfara, so we needed to do, just to cut a long story short, we needed to do simulation, because we were producing the systems from the scratch ourselves. We couldn't afford to buy an already made. So while we were designing the systems and everything, that day we understood the value of the YDX because we needed those mathematics to calculate the efficiency of the system at that point. And the engineers, of course, they did that. But the point I'm trying to make is we don't understand production as a country. And because we don't understand production as a country, we're always consuming and all of that. It's going to be very, very difficult for us to actually balance that ratio. But another thing is the government needs to ensure that they put in place structures that ensure that this is encouraged, that production can be encouraged. If we don't do that, it's going to be very difficult for us to actually match that up.
So now moving on to the Punch newspaper, you know, politics, I mean, all campaigns are actually starting in 2 days from now.
I'm excited.
And, almost everyone is excited to see, though, of course, though far I don't see, you know, a lot of Nigerians say we don't see issues, we see banalities, we see things that are not really the main issues. But of course, the Punch is reporting that demand for bulletproof vehicles, special gadgets for security are increasing. And maybe they attribute that to the start of the campaigns. And then the story has writers that say, VIPs, politicians, others procure armored vehicles, demand overwhelms dealers. Suppliers confirm increased demand. Sales expert worry over killings, kidnappings. Politicians' actions show 2023 polls may not be violence-free, according to the pro-democracy group. What's your take on this, the commencement of the campaign and this preparation by the politicians?
I think whether or not our 2023 elections are going to be violence-free is highly dependent on the countenance of the current candidates and how they do their campaigns. We're hoping and we're advocating that they ensure that they promote the peace and keep the sanity that we've managed to endure for the past 23 years of our democracy as a country. But safety first. Trying to protect yourself is not a harm. It's actually a constitutional right. They can get their armored vehicles and whatnot. But the honest truth is, if we don't check the insecurity part and ensure that security structures are strengthened, it's why I was really excited when I heard about, I've not read the pamphlet yet, but I saw that the Army has mass-produced the pamphlets to ensure efficiency of the military throughout the entire process of the electioneering, throughout the entire electioneering process, which is actually a very good thing. I'm hoping, or it is looking forward to what can be put in place, because it seems that Nigeria this is one of the first elections that we are getting way ready ahead of time, which is a good thing. So I'm hoping that we can actually get it right. We cannot say we are actually hanging precariously around so many things that are happening in the country. So it's very difficult to actually predict what area we tilt toward. But one thing I can guarantee is that there's now more political awareness. Nobody wants to die for any candidate as much as before. Of course, there are people who would still fall prey to the thuggery of politicizing that angle. But more people are more aware now. More people are trying to be a part of it, and hopefully we'll be able to keep the peace moving forward that way.
Okay, well, still, if you look at this, paper, there's a story from where the World Bank is talking about worsening economic outlook, and welfare worsening outlook is uncertain. The economic outlook is uncertain, and then welfare is worsening. And then I remember reading one story, I think this morning, talking about subsidy, how the figures still jacked up. I think it's one of the papers this morning. How do you reconcile this? Especially, you have earlier spoken about our debt portfolio, how the profile keeps rising.
I think the Nigerian the standard of living has always been worsening for the past. It has been a steady deterioration for the past few years. Just yesterday, I was with a few of my friends and we're discussing salaries, and someone mentioned that, even if you're being paid about 500,000 naira per month, it's going to be still very difficult for you to get married on that salary. That's just the context of the conversation. It's going to be difficult for you to keep a family, raise a family, because unless you don't have extra responsibilities, that money is not going to be enough, especially when you live in a city like Abuja. And you could see the sense in what he was saying, because in all honesty, if you look at how much it costs you to transit, how much housing costs, and the fact that all of these are still going to be, there's still a 7.5% tax that will have to come out of your salary and a host of other deductibles. And you look at the realities of that money and your recurrent expenditure, you might not even have, I'm always in awe of people who can save out of 100,000 naira per month. I'm always in awe of them, like, how do you do it? Because the economic situation has really not helped. It has not really been dwindling. It's still, 1 minute we're like, it's going to go down. Just last week they said Forex reserve was very, very low. Now this is a surge in it. It's the Nigerian system is just really weird, and we're hoping that however it is that the wind blows heavily, eventually it blows positively.
All right, now on the Nation newspaper, there's this story on petrol, and it says petrol subsidy hits 2.57 trillion naira, and this major reason is because supply rose by 10%. What's your take on this?
I've always been of the opinion that we should actually remove that subsidy thing. In all honesty, but the only catch for me is, before you remove it, ensure that there's steady power in the country. If you can ensure that there's steady power in the country, I don't have a problem with you removing the fuel subsidy, because we cannot be producing secondary source of power for ourselves when you've removed the one thing that would have made basic amenity easily affordable for every Nigerian. That money that we are spending on subsidy could actually be repurposed for a lot of other things in the country. And the earlier we begin to actually see the long-term impact of certain decisions over short-term gains, the better we're going to be actually as a country.
You talked about, providing a steady source of power. Now, on the Punch newspaper, there's a story that actually talks about 37 firms, getting licensed to produce 762.3 megawatts. Will that change anything?
I think it might. Deregularizing the power sector would actually be good, especially the production angle of it and not just the distribution, because the government has shown that they cannot do it. So since they can't do it, I think it's better if we let private sector players to come in. The only problem with it is that, as opposed to before, where power was cheap, because in all honesty, power is still cheap. It's just going to become a bit more expensive because private sectors are always going to maximize profits every single time. That's the essence of investment. So, and that's the reality of things. The only thing we hope is that the government should find a way, willfully, of course, to ensure that there's some regulation to make sure that the prices are not outrageous. Because the production angle of the power sector has always been a problem and not the distribution. So when people, I remember that when we didn't understand it at first, when NEPA was converted to PHCN and then the whole breaking down to AEDC, KEDC and the rest of it, these are all the distribution angles. So it is what has been manufactured or what has been produced that is given to them for them to sell. So if there's no power for them to sell, and if you see what they're doing with it now is they prioritize certain areas over certain areas. So if the power is not as much, they will channel more of it to certain areas that are high priority for them, where they know that they are getting more of their money as opposed to other areas as well. So I think the government needs to come in that angle. If the production angle can be good, the distribution angle will also be very, very good, I think.
So you've earlier spoken about, excitement about the campaign starting, and in the front page of Blueprint newspaper this morning, it's talking about intrigues and anxiety ahead of the kick-off of the campaign. What's your own hopes and maybe aspirations? What do you look forward to with the campaign starting?
Drama. I look forward to the drama. I'm really excited about it, really, because the prequel to it, because I call everything that's happened has been the prequel to this series that's about to start, has been quite entertaining. They've shown us that we're actually in for a long haul and that the rides are going to be a bit bumpy, especially for a lot of people. And I'm looking forward to really the dynamics of it, because I feel like this is going to be one of the most shocking elections, almost as shocking as 2015 election, if not even more shocking than 2015 elections.
Why do you think
it is so difficult? Like, we feel like we know what's going to happen, but honestly, we don't. Like, you have to be very arrogant to assume that you've actually predicted. Even if you manage to, it is not based on real facts, really. It is just based on a presumptive analysis that you did that actually led up to what you predicted. But
so,
the thing is changing.
If I just supposed to have a rider on what you are saying, this morning says 154 days to the polls, Obi is set to disrupt and deadlock the presidential run. And it has a rider that said, these days surveys predict inconclusive poll at first ballot if elections were held today. Is that the feeling you are having? Is that what you are saying?
Not necessarily. I think in the feeling of excitement and all of that, we also have to be realistic with certain things. We can't say really. I remember last week I was at one of my former offices. It's a government office, of course. Then we're discussing the possibilities of election and all of that. Part of what came up was the potency of Peter Obi's campaign. He has shown that he has force and vigor, which is a good thing, and I'm excited about that. The Osun State election show that young people are ready to vote, and the larger demographic of the young people are actually for him, because if you look at the people who voted for Adeleke, they were between 18 to 35 in large mass. But I have argued this again. I said, and I'm saying this publicly so that if it's going to be an issue, it should be addressed. One of the easiest ways that people are going to be disenfranchised would be to call off the ASU strike. Students have registered between February and July when it closed, and most of them registered to vote in their homes, not in their schools. So if the strike is called off and you move back to school, you've been disenfranchised. You cannot vote. And that's one of the problems with the whole, you cannot vote except from the state where you've actually registered to vote, which is a big issue, which actually translates into a big issue. So I think that should actually be checked by INEC, or I don't know, INEC might not be able to do anything, but I think all of the political parties should actually look into that carefully and see that there is a big issue there, and how do you encourage people to still have the political will to move out from school back?
You can relocate your PVC to where you want to vote at least 60 days.
You can, but the question is not about the ability to do it. It's about the political will to do it. If I'm in Zaria now and where I registered to vote is in Lagos, I start thinking, pack my bag, go to Lagos. Of course, it's rested on you as a person, but also there has to be external factors that actually stimulate me to want to do it. So I think that should also be checked.
All right, thank you so much, Mukhtar Suleiman, Public Affairs commentator, for joining us on the show today. It's always a pleasure having you.
It's always exciting to be here. Thank you guys so much.
All right, with that, we'll take a break, and when we come back at the top of the hour, the show continues.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily